So what are you most scared about for this interview? Anything? Are you feeling okay? Like, are there questions you're like nervous to talk about?
No.
My goal is that students and people that see this, and I consider it like a short documentary, even though
Right.
we're just having a conversation.
I love it.
I think that it's okay to be real, and I feel
Yeah.
like so many times we're not as real as we should be because we're so worried about and
Political
rightfully
correctness,
so,
right?
rightfully
Right.
so.
Right. But we're sometimes it's political correctness, but sometimes it's I'm afraid I might say the wrong thing,
Right.
or I don't know really what to say.
Right.
And I've been telling people lately, it's okay just to say I don't know. My name is Crystal Rodriguez. I am the Chief of Staff to the President, and I'm also the Chief Diversity Officer for Buffalo State College.
And Crystal, how do you define free speech?
I define free speech as the freedom to express opinions, thoughts, and ideas, free from fear of any type of retaliation or any type of punishment or censorship. It's an ability, it's a principle rooted in American history that allows people to have their own opinions and develop their own ideas.
What do you think the importance is of having free speech?
It's hugely important. The importance of free speech is paramount, and it's really the cornerstone of our democracy. I'm a little bit of an American history buff, and when you look at the Bill of Rights, and you look at the Declaration of Independence, and you look at the historical behavior, a lot of the conflict that began and ultimately became the American Revolution was rooted in the inability to express ideas and the inability to really have freedom of expression. And that's verbal. It was freedom of expression and press. So a lot of that came from not being listened to by the crown. And then it morphed into the American Revolution. And then we have this great experiment called the United States of America. So it's paramount to our democracy.
Is there a time that you remember that that you actually like really recognized that you had the freedom of speech, that maybe you feel like you recognized in your life, like an age or time, oh, this is a freedom and this is something that I have?
It's actually a funny story. I mean, because there was no such thing as a democracy in my household growing up, so I didn't have freedom of speech with my parents, right?
Yeah.
But at a young age, I thought it was really important. At a young age, I developed a love of reading and writing, but to be able to say or express an opinion about something. I remember being probably in third grade right on campus here at Campus West, and there was issues with our lunch. And I felt like, there were a bunch of adults in the room, but they weren't talking to the people that were actually eating lunch, us. And writing an essay about the importance of lunch to us, not only just from the food aspect, but also from a social aspect. And it felt, I don't know if I would have described it as empowering at third grade, but I can remember looking back and feeling like, wow, even if they didn't agree with me, I felt empowered to be able to express myself.
That says a lot about you in third grade to be speaking out.
Oh, yeah.
What is your definition of civil discourse?
Civil discourse is the ability to be able to engage in a conversation. And the goal of the conversation should be really to enhance mutual understanding of points of view. I think that you really have to be fully disattached or unattached to the outcome. Often in civil discourse, you have to be willing to walk away from the table and not having won anybody over, and walk away and agree to disagree in some cases. But you have to go into it willing to listen and to gain an understanding or enhance your understanding of the other person's position. I can give an example. I got into a conversation, a civil discourse with a law school colleague who thinks that it's okay or thinks that it's actually a freedom of expression to have the Confederate flag in the workspace. I, of course, disagree with that. And he and I were talking, and I said, even if you don't believe or share my belief that the flag represents some racist views and values, it certainly represents some treasonous ones. And so he didn't agree, and he thinks that it is a cultural icon of cultural times, and it represents a region. And we walked away from the table, neither of us winning the other, but at least having listened to each other and understanding our position.
That's great.
Yeah.
Did you find it hard or interesting to listen and in that conversation to listen to the other opinion that was so different than your own?
A mixture of both, right? Because I'm trying to express my opinion. I'm trying to listen to his opinion. And in the midst of that, I'm also trying to control my emotions. And they run very deep sometimes. And were there times in the midst of it that I just wanted to slap him and say, snap out of it? Yeah. But this was his position. That wasn't going to get me anywhere. And I think that it is important for people to be able to express their views, even if they are in direct opposition to my own.
You raise a really good point about it, trying to keep your emotions in check. I notice that happens less and less on social media and in the internet. Obviously we all have feeds and we all have friends of all different
Right.
backgrounds and political persuasions and ideas. And man, sometimes I just have to
Take a break.
not
Yeah.
look. Do you feel that there are opportunities for civil discourse in social media?
There are many opportunities, and I do see examples of civil discourse, even on my page. We can have a difference of opinion. For example, in yesterday's historic announcement about the Democratic presidential or vice presidential candidate, right? It's historic. You might not support her. You might not think that she's a good candidate, but the selection is historic, and we can talk about those things. Social media provides an opportunity for that, and unfortunately, a lot of people don't take advantage and engage in civil discourse. It's an attack on you. It's a personal attack, and then you're wrong for not feeling the way that I feel. You have to step back from social media and realize it's not always a genuine platform. I call them Facebook tough guys. What someone may say on Facebook or on any social media platform may not be what they'd say in person. But you really have to know yourself, where you stand, and I think you have to have a tremendous amount of respect for a diversity of opinions. After all, that makes up the United States. I have gotten emotional a lot of times. I have to admit that, but my emotion sometimes is in defense of people being able to express their views. I'm a veteran. I served in the United States Navy, and I
Thank you
feel
for your
as
service.
if
I did not realize that you were a veteran.
and I feel like, I've sort of put my life on the line for people to be able to express their views, and I want them to. And that's important to me, even if they are, like I said, in opposition. So social media can be an opportunity, can be a wonderful opportunity for us to engage in civil discourse. Unfortunately, it doesn't always go as civilly as we expect.
You make a really good point. I feel like sometimes we forget that there's another person on the end of whatever we're talking about. It's almost like, I think of it as like, angry driving, and you get sometimes I get a little frustrated when I drive, and then you get to the place and you realize it was your grandma in front of you, right? And so all those things that you've said, thank God she didn't hear you.
Yeah.
But they do hear you on social media.
And I think, if you're going to be intentional and genuinely engage in civil discourse, you have to keep those things in mind. I don't want to call certain people moronic or idiots, although I'm thinking it. That's really going to gain nothing. Right? And also, no matter what they think, I don't want to hurt their feelings. The problem does become when I'm saying something offensive to you and they're fighting words, like I'm inciting some type of violence. There are issues with that as well.
You want to talk a little bit about those issues and what
Sure.
you feel those are?
So, I think that in our emails we discussed, you discussed a desire to talk about the limitations on free speech and civil discourse. And there are some bona fide, especially legal limitations. For instance, fighting words. I should not say things that incite some type of violence. The laws differ depending on jurisdiction, but in some jurisdictions it's illegal to use racial slurs because it could incite a fight. You're not allowed to engage in free speech that is libelous or slanderous. And of course, those type of documents or communications that are protected by, for instance, classified information or dictated by contract. If you and I engage and we have a non-disclosure agreement, obviously I don't have a defense of freedom of speech because I entered into a contract that limits my speech. Those are all important limitations. Another one is the Supreme Court in this, I remember these cases from law school, obscenity and pornography. But what is obscenity? And the Supreme Court justice says, I might not be able to define it, but I know what it is when I see it.
Do you mind, as someone with great knowledge of it, it is, and this is probably hard to do, but for those that don't know, just breaking down in like maybe quick terms what libel and slander is?
Sure.
Or what's libel is and what's slander?
Sure. It is false information that's being spread that could possibly hurt your reputation, whether it be professionally, personally, and there are certain limitations to that as well. It goes a little bit further. You can press the line with public officials, but if you put it in writing or if you verbalize it and it's not true, you're in some trouble.
What about just as a person or emotionally? Do you feel that there are times that free speech should be limited in any way other than legal? That is a tough question.
That is a very tough question. My mantra in my work, especially in my diversity and inclusion work, is to never call anybody out but invite people in. And I think that goes for conversations. There are a lot of times where I could point out where someone is not as learned as me or as intelligent as me, but I don't think that it really gains me anything to do that. So I think we should have the control over our tongue, as my grandmother would say, and not only just check ourselves legally, but check ourselves morally at times.
When someone is offended by what people are saying or doing, how should they respond?
Yeah, when they're offended or even angry, right? That's where we have to check our emotions. And listen, this is advice in an interview that I'm giving that's easy to give. It's not always easy in practice. I have moments where I have to really, practice the count to 10, and sometimes that 10 has to turn to 20. And taking deep breaths, being very mindful, you want to practice all of those things. If you're offended and you're angry, there's nothing wrong with expressing that. And I can say that, what you just said offended me greatly. In fact, right now I'm struggling with emotions that are bubbling up inside me, and I'd like to be able to express why. At that point, I think that it's important to decide whether we have this conversation now. Can I engage in civil discourse now? Am I able to control or check my emotions? Or should I have this, take this moment to take some time, gather my thoughts, and then come back to the table? You don't have to always have it in the moment. You can come back to the table, having gathered your thoughts, having gathered your points, and then engage. These are very emotional times. I did an interview not that long ago. It was not long after George Floyd, and I found myself bubbling up with emotions and even beginning to cry in the interview. And of course, being a tough woman, and I was first trying to gather it, but then it was just like, no, I need for you to know that I'm exhausted in having to explain why a woman of color, why I'm constantly fighting in professional and in personal arenas to just be equal, right? That was a time in a place where the emotion needed to be seen. I needed to express how exhausted I am just with being a Black woman. If it had turned to anger, I think I would have said, I can't have this conversation right now. I think when you're offended and you're angry, you have a right to express your offense and anger, but in a civil way.
Let's say that you're in a situation. Let's say you're in, for students, it's a classroom. For working professionals, maybe it's a meeting. But let's say you're in something that you cannot easily get out of that space, and you're angry. What do you recommend? What do you do?
That's tough. In class, I think that students should know that. I went to law school because I don't like math, so I don't know if this necessarily applies in a math class where you can say you disagree with the professor. I think that formulas are formulas, and, in math it is what it is. But in other classes where if a teacher is expressing an opinion, right, I think that even in a classroom setting, a student can express disagreement with that opinion, and they can civilly discuss that. There's nothing precluding an expression of opinions. Remember, the goal is to, and sometimes our opinions will remain different, but sometimes they will change, right? And if you are open enough to having that, I think that that's a beautiful thing. But where you're in a situation where you can't move, for me personally, I choose to remain silent. If you can't say anything nice, then don't say anything at all. My grandmother has a book. I'm going to write a book one day about her sayings. But she has this wonderful saying that she says, you have, two ears and one mouth, which means you should be listening twice as much as you're talking. And sometimes it's beneficial just to listen and not say anything. And once again, it doesn't mean you can't come back and express your opinion. But if you're not able to do it in a way that you can't check your emotions, or where your emotions as expressed are not lending something positive to the conversation, I'd suggest taking a break.
How can society, with so many different opinions, beliefs, political persuasions, life experiences, practice both free speech and civil discourse at the same time?
It's absolutely possible. They're not mutually exclusive. There's nothing saying that you cannot fully express your opinion, your ideas, and engage in civil discourse. You can. Remember, I said it's important to understand that engaging in civil discourse, it's not necessarily that you're going to be able to persuade someone to your side. You have to be unattached. If you walk away and neither of you have come to the middle even, okay, but you've been able to express your view. I've been able to understand it better and enhance my understanding of what your position is. There's nothing saying I have to agree with it. So they both can and they should exist together. We have to sort of regain or reclaim our love of this idea of free speech. We all should be able to engage in it. And we know historically that all of us have not been able to engage in, there's this beautiful document, there's these beautiful words. And as I've grown up loving them, I've also been conflicted as a lover of constitutional law. There is the conflict of knowing that my ancestors haven't always enjoyed these freedoms. Nevertheless, we can be better moving forward. So we have to reignite or even start a love of a diversity of opinions. If we all thought the same thing, that would be really, really boring. If we all were made to think the real thing, that would be really, really boring. I think that there has never been a time in my lifetime than now that we are seeing where freedom of expression, where civil discourse, and even disobedience. We're seeing people who are more courageous. They're engaging in civil discourse. All lives matter versus Black Lives Matter. Well, why? They're both true statements, but why are we on whatever side we're on and engaging in those conversations? And those are actually conversations as the new Chief Diversity Officer that I want to bring on campus. I don't want to bring the safe people on campus, if I can say that. I want to bring people on campus that will ignite thought, that will ignite emotions, and that will discuss points of view that are very firm. And I think we need that. So I'd have to say right now in the time that we're living in, it's very, very exciting. I talk to my 10-year-old and I'm like, this is amazing. You're going to be talking to your children and your grandchildren one day about this. Much like I'm blessed to still have my grandmother who's in her 90s, who was from Alabama and lived through those moments on the bridge. And to be able to talk about Selma, Alabama, and to know that my grandmother's a relic from history and experience that, we're going through a time like that now. So this is perfect, and it's a perfect opportunity if we handle it the right way.
What are your thoughts on civil disobedience? Do you believe that civil disobedience is an important thing, is right, should happen? And if so, how do you do that?
Yeah, I absolutely believe that civil disobedience should be exercised. And I really can't say whether or not it's right. As an attorney, I'm not recommending that people break laws, but civil disobedience, we know throughout history, has had a place. Certain shifts would never have happened without civil disobedience. I have been engaged in civil disobedience, and I think it's important. But one of the things that I'd like to stress is that having been in movements and and seeing things, they're very strategic and they're very planned. They're not impetuous. And I want to explain that. In engaging in civil disobedience, you are making a conscious decision to break a law, or to not adhere to a law, and you have to make that decision. In the civil rights movement, and even in some of the organized movements that I've been a part of, we have actually had talks that had lawyers at the table, that had money people at the table, where we discussed someone's, perhaps, we don't put this person in the forefront because they have a criminal record, but this one does not have a criminal record. Why do we discuss that? Because if you're going to be subjected to charges, they may be enhanced depending on your criminal background. We also look at, what are the criminal charges and what are the possible punishments. If there's going to be an arrest, there's a plan in place for bail. All of these things strategically are talked about. It should never be an impetuous thing. So I think there is a place. I think that it can be monumental. It can be phenomenal in moving along certain conversations, but it has to be strategic. Would I recommend it? I think it's a personal choice. At 25, would I mind being arrested? Did I mind? No. At 44, I might not want to spend a night in the holding center. So, it depends on your circumstances. It depends on where you are in life. But believe me, in the movements and organizations I've been involved in and in history, the decisions for civil disobedience have been very strategic, and I think they should be.
What I hear you saying is that civil disobedience is not a gut reaction. And that's an interesting way to phrase it, is that it's a planned, like it's an actual planned thing.
We have to be very strategic in making the decision. I'll give you the example locally. It came on national television. There was a young black man, who threw in fire into City Hall. He's facing federal charges. Those charges will forever, should they be successful, they'll forever be on his record. That'll prevent him from getting jobs. It'll prevent growth. Even if you look in history and you look at the behind story, Rosa Parks was strategic, right? It is something that throughout history, this woman, her body laid in state, right? And she did something that was so very important, but it was something that was planned.
Great.
And if you don't have the resources, there are organizations that do have the resources that you can join and you can be together. There's strength in numbers. So it might seem contrived, but it's important to really look at how you are exercising civil disobedience, and not only the effect it'll have on you personally or the people that are involved in it, but the long-term effect. And sometimes the decision is that in success of the movement, that action outweighs the cons.